Hi everybody, so this is your video about the circulatory system. So the circulatory system includes things like your heart, your lungs, and your veins and arteries. So let's talk about each one of those. So first things first, part of the circulatory system is also your kidneys because your veins and arteries are involved in them. They help with the filtration of the circulatory system. Number two is your arteries. So the arteries are colored red because that means that they're full of oxygen-rich blood. They carry blood away from the heart to the body. So they carry things away from the heart and to the body. The third thing is your heart itself. So it's a pump for the circulatory system. It also has 4 chambers, which we'll get into in a few slides. And then it's part of 2 different systems. So it's part of, taking part in oxygen-rich blood and taking part in oxygen-depleted blood. The fourth part is your veins. They're colored blue here. They're what brings blood back to your heart from the body. All right, the next part is the heart itself. So you're going to have to label one of these in your activity you're going to be doing tomorrow. But basically, the right atrium and right ventricle are what bring deoxygenated blood from the body back to the heart and to the lungs. So if you follow the arrow here, it brings it in here from either the lower part of your body or the upper part of your body, and then it brings it into the right atrium, pumps it through the right ventricle, or pumps it through this tricuspid valve into the right ventricle and to the pulmonary artery. So pulmonary means lung. So this is taking it to the lungs to be reoxygenated. So once the blood is reoxygenated, then it comes in through the pulmonary veins and it comes into your left atrium here through this mitral valve and into your aortic valve, your left ventricle, and through an aortic valve here to go through your aorta here into your body. So this is oxygenated blood, meaning it is oxygen rich. So I will have you label arrows as well as the name of things tomorrow. The next part is the pulmonary circuit. So this is the part where I was telling you about where your deoxygenated blood gets put into or taken to the lungs and then brought back through the heart to be put back into the body. So first things first, it transports oxygen poor blood from the right ventricle. So the right ventricle is right here to the lungs through this artery, this pulmonary artery right here, either to the right or to the left, where your blood picks up new blood supply and new oxygen supply. And then it returns the oxygen-rich blood here and here to the left atrium. So your left atrium is right here. Next, you have your systemic circuit. So your systemic circuit provides the functional blood supply to all your body tissues. So remember, red means that it's oxygen rich. So that blood is coming out of your left ventricle up into the body, either to the upper extremities or to the lower extremities. It carries that oxygen and nutrients to the cells and picks up CO2 or carbon dioxide and waste products. The systemic circulation carries that oxygenated blood from the left ventricle through your arteries to the capillaries, and we're going to get to capillaries in a second, in the tissues of the body. So from the tissue capillaries, the deoxygenated blood, so it's back to blue, returns through a system of veins. So veins are for deoxygenated, arteries are for oxygenated blood. Returns through a system of veins, like I said, to the right atrium in the heart, and the right atrium is right here. Next, you have the path of a blood cell through capillaries. So capillaries are really, really, really tiny. So arteries, and then arterial, and then capillaries. And then when the blood is coming in that's deoxygenated, it comes in through a vein to a venule and then to the capillaries. So in this process right here, that oxygen-rich blood comes in from the heart, from the lungs, and is pumped out of the body through the artery. So here's your artery. So here, this is like tissue cells in your lungs where that blood is being reoxygenated, and the opposite happens when it's being delivered to body tissues. Eventually, it reaches those capillaries where it can wash the cells with oxygen and nutrients. So there's an exchange of gases and other things there. And then the system begins to pick up metabolic waste and lose the oxygen. So right here, this is where you start to see the loss of oxygen, which eventually finds its way back to the heart through the veins and back to the lungs to pick up more oxygen. So it is circulatory, means a cycle. So it's literally a cycle that happens over and over again. So let's talk about the capillaries specifically. So this is a zoomed in look of a capillary. So this is the venous end, which means the vein end, and the blood flows towards that way. So this is if it's being dropped into a tissue and not necessarily the lungs, but the blood will flow through here. So in addition to forming the connection between your arteries and your veins, capillaries have a vital role in the exchange of gases, which is what's happening here, nutrients and metabolic waste products between the blood and the tissues of cells. Substances pass through the capillary wall. So this is a capillary wall here by diffusion, which means that it goes from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. Filtration, so it helps to filter out some bad stuff that can get into your veins and arteries. And then osmosis, which you guys should have learned about. So it goes from a higher pressure to a lower pressure. Next would be oxygen and carbon dioxide move across that capillary wall by diffusion. So oxygen is being dropped into, and then you've got carbon dioxide coming back into when it's artery to vein. Fluid movement across that capillary wall is determined by a combination of hydrostatic and osmotic pressure, as you can see here. And the net result of the capillary microcirculation here, created by the hydrostatic and osmotic pressure, is that substances leave the blood at one end of the capillary and return at the other end. So kind of a cool little system. Next, let's talk about pulse and the blood pressure. This is the coolest GIF on the planet. This is a real heart and it's actually pumping. So we can do this as scientists to reanimate stuff like this. This is actually a fairly healthy heart they've gotten here. So pulse refers to the rhythmic expansion of an artery that is caused by the ejection of blood from the ventricle. So ventricles are in the bottom part of the heart, remember? So literally that th noise is your ventricles literally moving blood by squeezing it. It can be felt where an artery is close to the surface and rests on something firm. So if you have ever tried to take your pulse using your two fingers against the bottom of your jaw to your neck, or even on your wrist, you can feel it because the artery is or on your left arm, right by your wrist. You can feel it pulsating. That way you could take your pulse. And then in common usage, the term blood pressure refers to arterial blood pressure, the pressure in the aorta and its branches. So this is the aorta right here. And you can see well, you can see a lot. You can see the arteries here. Systolic pressure is due to ventricular contraction. So systolic is the bottom of your heart. Diastolic occurs during cardiac relaxation, so your ventricle takes a moment to regain itself. So thunk, like the thumb of your heart, the th is the systolic, and the thumb is the diastolic. That's the easiest way to think of it. It's the thumb, the thumb, the thumb. Pulse pressure is the difference between your systolic pressure and your diastolic pressure. Blood pressure is measured by a sphygmomanometer, that's a really hard word, and is recorded as a systolic pressure over the diastolic pressure. So your blood pressure can be taken by one of those cuffs, and then the nurse will probably take their stethoscope and put it near your armpit of your elbow, I guess. And I don't really remember what the word is. And they'll listen to see when your pulse stops, because that's when they can get an accurate reading of your blood pressure. And by pulse, I mean like it stops for a minute because there's enough pressure to read. So 4 major factors interact to affect your blood pressure. And when they increase, blood pressure also increases. So as you get older, these become more important to think about. Your cardiac output, so how much work is your heart actually having to do. Blood volume, so how much blood is flowing through your heart. Peripheral resistance. So how much resistance is there? If you've ever heard of someone or even had someone that has had a heart attack, that means that some of this area of the heart begins to die and it begins to freeze, just like in rigor mortis. I mean, the heart is a muscle. So it dies and it makes it a lot harder to pump blood through. So that peripheral resistance becomes harder if you have problems with your heart. And then the viscosity of the blood. So you don't want your blood to be too thin, but you also don't want it to be too thick. So like if you've ever seen blood actually, like if you've accidentally cut your finger and watched it, that's the perfect thickness of blood. You don't want it super watery, and you don't also want it like molasses or like honey. You don't want it that thick. Now let's talk about healthy and unhealthy blood pressure ranges. So most of you probably have your normal. So your systolic is 120 or less than 120, and your diastolic is less than 80. That is the normal range. It becomes elevated when it's between this range and for your systolic and less than 80 for your diastolic. The important part, remember, is your systolic, because that's when your ventricle is pumping. High blood pressure, like hypertension, these two things are very bad. Hypertensive crisis, you're going to need to see a doctor at this point. But your systolic is less than 120, diastolic is less than 80 would be a normal blood pressure. So as an adult, my family has a whole range of cardiac issues. So I've had a lot of tests done on my heart and all that kind of stuff. Hypertension runs in my family. So my normal is about, I mean, it's pretty normal. So less than 120, less than 80. So pretty nice. If you guys have any other questions, let me know.